afternoon and welcome to our British Water Thought Leadership Series, Talking on Water. My name's Mark Fletcher. I'm the current chair of British Water, and I have with me today Alasdair Reisner, the CEO of the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, CECA, who's kindly agreed to an interview which we're recording to share across the water sector. Good afternoon, Alasdair.
Good afternoon.
In terms of the outline for the interview, I'm going to ask a few questions, but we'll sort of have a conversation. Then Alasdair can share his thoughts, and we might have some follow-up for clarification. So if we're all clear. So Alasdair, to start with, I've got a few of these. Give me a bit of a prompt. Tell us something about CECA. What are your present priorities for CECA, and what does CECA do?
Well, I mean, CECA does what it says on the tin. So we are the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, and so unsurprisingly, we represent the interests of the UK civil engineering contractors. We're relatively fortunate insofar as pretty much all of the significant civil engineering contractors in the UK are members of our organisation, and they deliver, we think, about 80% by volume of work in the market. But it's an interesting market at the moment because we've had probably a decade of infrastructure activity where it's been right at the heart of the government's focus. And a lot of that's been focused around transport infrastructure. But within the last few years, we've seen a dynamic market shift, not necessarily away from transport, but towards utilities. And I won't need to tell you, water is a huge part of that.
It is. It's really stepping up, and we're really having interviewed the chair of Ofwat. He's not seeing this as a 5-year thing. He's talking 10, 15, 20 years. So we're looking at a real shift and a need for reinvestment, and it's really important that we have our contractors there. So in terms of last year, I think we worked together to discuss challenges regarding the sort of supply chain issues in the water industry. Is CECA planning any ongoing work to support the supply chain ahead of the huge water and wastewater projects expected across the UK?
That's interesting because we're just at the start of a new business plan period, and it won't surprise you to hear that water features fairly high up in our priorities. Clearly, it's a general election year, so that's another thing that we're going to be focusing on. But frankly, it doesn't really matter who's in power in the corridors of Whitehall and Westminster. There's just this massive need to invest in water. And so ensuring that our members, the wider industry, are fit for that future, I think is going to be a big part of our activity going forward. The biggest part of that, I think, is if we assume that enhancements in water is going to grow by sort of 300%. And I know that we're not quite at a position where we've got fixity on that, but I don't think it's unreasonable. Certainly that's the conversations that we know the water companies are having, that we know that our members that are active in water are having. That's radical. I've been with CECA for 15 years, and I don't wish to sound dismissive, but water's been quite a mature market. So it's steady and safe. You know what you're getting with water. Not too much volatility. Maybe a bit of volatility around the sort of the year end. Sorry, the end of the regulatory periods. But this kind of explosive growth is, to us, very unusual for water. I think the industry's really good at responding to challenges.
Yes.
But I can't think of many bigger challenges in terms of responding for a trebling in the size of the sector, in essence, not overnight, but in a very short period. So I think for us, meeting that resourcing challenge is going to be really, really important. And I think it's one of those things that we're only going to be able to do if we work collaboratively, because CECA can't solve that problem. The government can't solve that problem. Our members can't solve the problem. British Water can't solve the problem. But if we all work together, I think we've got a fighting chance of tackling some of those issues.
I'm really encouraged to hear that, because we've been advocating for a lot of common purpose, us all working together collectively, and together we're stronger.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. What's your view of the supply chain's role in helping to solve these future challenges? Because we've got different tiers in the supply chain, and how we can get the most out of that supply chain. How do you see it?
I think it's interesting because I think there's fundamentally three players on the pitch. There's the government and the role they play. There's the clients and the role they play. and then there's the supply chain. I think of those three parties, the supply chain is the most important in this resourcing challenge, because ultimately it's not going to be the government that physically recruits the people that we need to do the jobs, that trains the people to do the jobs, that brings in the technologies, brings in the sort of the processes, and it's to a greater extent, it's probably not going to be the water companies either, although they'll play a much more influential role in that discussion. It's the companies out there, from the biggest multinationals down to the small regional firms and specialist providers, that are going to have to get ready. But this is where I think we can look up the chain to government and water companies, because I think the one thing that all of those businesses really need is certainty, stability, and an understanding of what's required of them. I think it's good that a lot of the companies are obviously already in contract with suppliers, have got long-standing relationships with those suppliers, because that helps with the narrative, it helps with that building of trust. But this is a really, really big challenge that we face. So that clarity for industry will allow our guys to invest. But I think that then when that investment comes, what we're seeing a lot more of in the market is more collaborative structures, both within contract and across industry, to say, we need to solve this problem together. So how are we going to do that? And how do we ensure that the incentives within the industry are aligned in a way that, if one person wins, the other person doesn't lose? We've got to make the case that if people are being asked to invest heavily, they're able to do so on the basis that they'll do well, but their customer will also do well. I don't want to end up AMP8 being a bun fight because we've ended up without the resource, and therefore it ended up quite adversarial.
So I think that the win-win across that all the players is absolutely fundamental. Are there any changes in procurement that you'd propose to ensure more efficient delivery that maybe CECA are behind? Are the new models that you're thinking about?
Well, we've been involved for probably the thick end of 10 years now with the infrastructure client group, which developed what it called its Project 13 initiative. Now, always sounds very mysterious, Project 13, but it was just the 13th project in a program of different projects that it was looking to deliver, nothing more than that. But having gone into it with a great deal of cynicism, and I will be honest, I was really quite unhappy about the idea of Project 13, because in theory it gets rid of contractors, and when you run an organisation for contractors, that's not a good place to be. But actually, when we've looked at the evolution of that model, it's been a huge success for those that have implemented it, and our members have found good quality working relationships with their customers, with their supply chain, under that so-called enterprise model. And we are seeing that gather pace in the water sector, but also in the wider infrastructure sector, because there's nothing new in it. There's no sort of great ideological shift. It's really just bundling up all of the good things that we know work and saying, let's package it under one umbrella. So I think we'll see more of that kind of model as we get into AMP8, just because almost the necessity of the volume drives to solutions that will actually make a difference, and this is one of those solutions that will actually make a difference. So I'm quite excited to see how that does work, and I think hopefully where it does start to demonstrate making the difference, both for the regulator and for individual water companies, it'll start to just become the obvious choice, because it goes back to that point of alignment. If you've got everyone working towards a common goal, when the goal is as big as it is at the moment, it feels like having that structure that's a win-win for everyone is the only way that we're going to get to where we need to in terms of delivering outstanding results for ultimately the person that's most important, which is the person who turns on their tap.
That's right. And so we'll look out for enterprise model. The evolution of Project 13. It sounds like a film or something, or a new series or something like that. And so what opportunities are there to sort of collaborate and safeguard our environment that help deliver? You mentioned our customers, that sort of social contract for communities we serve. And I think there's been a shift to working a lot closer with local communities and building really good relationships during construction. So what opportunities do you think exist in that space?
Well, I think this is both the area where we've done best and the area where we've done worst in recent years. Some of the negative environmental impacts that the infrastructure sector has placed on society have been terrible. And as an industry, if we don't own up to and address that, that's part of the problem. But equally, when I go out and start talking about people working in our industry, I'm genuinely able to say you can have an impact on improving the lives of human beings across the country and improving the environment. Because if we're going to tackle some of these big sustainability challenges, whether it's carbon, whether it's water quality, whether it's emissions, all of that stuff, ultimately infrastructure is going to play a big part in solving those problems. So I don't wish to sound like a broken record, but that sort of approach to collaboration where we very quickly identify where the good practice is in the sector and we steal with pride across the sector to say, if it works for you, let's make sure we use it across the industry really quickly to deliver, particularly on a sustainability perspective, much, much better outcomes, because we're already seeing the consequences of particularly carbon, but also reduced biodiversity. And I think that's going to become increasingly stark, and the public really does care about this. This is not a nice to have. This is why on earth are you doing the things that you're doing? And we no longer, that social contract breaks down if there's a perception that we're just continuing on willy-nilly without any consideration to the impact that we're having on society. But equally, I think we can burnish our reputation with the public if we can show that we're leading change, that we're delivering better outcomes. And I'm quite excited about that. I think that does hold an enormous opportunity to really reposition our industry. No one has to sell a career at Apple or at Google or places like that, because they look like exciting, dynamic places to work that deliver real sort of societal benefits. I actually think we deliver 1 billion times more benefit to society than either of those organizations. And we've just got to be a bit more positive about speaking about the benefits that we are able to deliver.
And I think you've touched on something there that's, I think, really important, and that's that word outcome.
Yeah.
And us being able to get a handle on what those social outcomes, or maybe what some of those environmental outcomes might be.
Yeah.
The sort of first otter for 200 years, or the first salmon for whatever those things might be, I think can be really positive things for people. So is there anything that we've not covered or discussed that you think this is something maybe about the 5-year cycle and how we want to get something that's a lot more consistent going forward? What do you think are the opportunities from a CECA perspective, if I give you a bit of a sort of a open mic?
Well, I mean, the 5-year cycle is a really interesting one, because I remember probably a decade ago working with British Water and others about the cyclicality of investment in the water sector. And I still don't think we've quite cracked that nut. I think there's been some really good stuff done, and everyone kind of understands the problem and wants to solve it, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So for me, I think using the opportunities that arise from the new Procurement Act and sort of moving away from existing procurement regulations to start to really think about, going back to your point about outcomes, how do we deliver tremendous outcomes for the end user? How do we reposition our sector, and what is the nature of the sort of the commercial structure of industry that helps us to deliver stellar outcomes? And so I think that part of that is sort of detaching ourselves from boom and bust cycles, but other parts of it is probably just a very different approach to delivery that targets the things that matter most. We've clearly got a major issue now about financial viability. And I don't want that to blow up in our faces, but it also potentially creates an opportunity to reset the way that we think about things. I'm not saying sort of nationalize the industry or anything like that. I'm talking about just let's take stock. Let's think about the customer, think about the user, and start to deliver outstanding results. And that's something that I think that it doesn't matter where you are in the industry, you can get your head around that. And you can say, what's my part? What do I do? Because I think if we sit here and go, wait for other people to drive the change that we need to see in the sector, we'll be waiting forever. But if everyone sees that it's part of their role to secure a much better future for the water sector, for the infrastructure sector, I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility for us to do that. Just to give an example of that, we're doing work around diesel, which is it's the lifeblood of the civil engineering sector. All of our plant runs on it. And we've been asked to get rid of 78% of diesel use by 2035, which is massive. And I must admit, when we first said we were going to do it, I thought, well, there's no chance of that. But actually, imagine if we did, what changes that would get, not just in terms of carbon emissions, but in terms of people's health on site, noise, and all of these things. And it's because people are being bold and people are saying we're not willing to accept where we are, and they're taking ownership for that leadership. So I think there's an exciting future, and in some ways, it's one of the benefits of the fact that we do have an upswing in investment in enhancement projects, is that it almost gives the wherewithal, the volume required to do some of these big picture changes. It's harder to do that in a mature sector where it's, I'm not going to say turning the handle over, but it's a bit more just keep on keeping on. When you've got this big shift, I think there's an opportunity to do things very, very differently and much, much better.
And I think try things out and not be, let's learn from it and share it. And I think that idea of working with nobody's working to, for environmental deterioration. We're all working to common goals. I think it just connecting those things up collectively could be really powerful.
Yeah.
If you had to pick a few words in terms of the next 5 years, what are the words that come into you, from maybe for your members? What are the words that is it positive? Is it negative? What are the words that you think are really important?
So I think it's very, very positive. I think we're coming out of a period of uncertainty. The last 5 years, not in water, but generally, everything that's gone on both globally and in UK has created uncertainty all the way back to sort of 2016 and the referendum. And it feels like there's a potential for a bit more stability generally. And that's what we're going to need if we're going to meet this investment challenge. So I think the second word I would talk about is visibility, because for the first time, we're going to have some mega projects. If you're in London, you have seen Tideway and the impact that that's had, but we're going to have mini tideways across the whole of the UK, I think. And so the ability to show that positive benefit, because this isn't controversial road schemes and things like this. This is bringing the very sort of center point of life to people's homes. And we can show that that's what we're doing. And so I'm really excited about that. I think there's a really good opportunity to say, look, this is what we do. This is the exciting change that we can bring, whether it's water transfer schemes, whether it's reservoirs, whether it's some of the improvements to water quality that communities will see across the country. So yeah, I think it is that visibility of our sector is going to be really important, and we should grasp that with both hands and be quite excited about it. But the third thing is, look, almost going back to where we started this discussion, resourcing is going to be the biggest issue, I think. Making sure we've got enough people around the country at all levels, because this isn't just about sort of entry level people doing civil engineering operative type activities, although we will need lots of those. It's all of the technical roles, it's leadership roles, it's even, dare I say, ministers that know what they're talking about. You know, across the industry, we're really going to need to have an upswing in capacity and competence to deliver this program. So I think that's where we're placing a lot of our resource. We're going to be hopefully rolling out training, so no one's more than an hour away, wherever they are in the UK, from really high quality training provision for some of those entry level skills. But I think there's a load of other things that we're going to need to do that we're only just beginning to understand what the requirements are. So our ask, and I'm sure British Water's asks, would be, can we work together on this? Can we make a better future for the water sector, make a better future for the infrastructure sector by working collaboratively?
So I think that's a really positive message to finish on. And that whole idea of reskill, upskill, co-opetition, where we're working together and collaborating where we can, but we're mature enough to understand what we're trying to achieve, is really important. So many thanks. And I really welcome your willingness to not just engage, but share your thoughts and enthusiasm. It's really encouraging to see. Want to wish you every success and CECA on behalf of British Water, and anything that we can do where we can work together and maybe collaborate and support, then please let us know. But thank you very much.